we subscribe to the 70-20-10 model for development, which is, 70% is experiential learning, 20% is exposure, and 10% is the formal learning. I think the formal learning piece is critical because it builds consistency, especially, across our population and all the markets that we're in. And I think what we're trying to get better at, providing more intentionality in that exposure and experience and what that looks like. We realize that sort of hip to hip mentorship that you get from your manager, or when you become a new area manager, we have this great built-in community of people who are truly happy to help. But how do we become more prescriptive in what that looks like? What does that experience start to look like for them? What does the mentorship, the coaching they get, that 70% learning that's in experience, that's experientially based, how do we drive more consistency in that?
Hello, welcome to the Skilled Podcast. This is the podcast for HR leaders where we talk about the stories and strategies from leaders who have turned growth and development into a competitive advantage. I'm Madeline Miles, my co-host today, Omar Glass, co-founder and CEO of Growth Space. And today we are very lucky to be joined by Jon Caldwell, Chief People Officer at Valvoline.
Hello, great to be here.
So I think just to start off, let's hear a little bit about your career journey and your time at Valvoline and some of the big things that you're focusing on in your role as CPO.
Sure. So I'm a lifelong HR professional. I guess I've been doing this now for about 26 years. A bulk of my career, a majority of my career, I was with Fifth Third Bank for 14 years prior to joining Valvoline. And there really spent a lot of time as an HR business partner director, first in the field and then supporting the corporate functions, many of the corporate functions. And then my last role with Fifth Third for the last 5 years or so, I led a team that was really focused on organizational effectiveness. So talent process design, change management, workforce planning. It was a good, varied experience and a number of experiences within the same company. And I was very fortunate. Fifth Third has a really good forward-thinking HR function, so learned a lot there. And then in late 2016, I joined Valvoline, and it has been an action-packed 9+ years since then. So in 2016, Valvoline became its own publicly traded company. For many years, it was a business unit within Ashland Oil. That what was intriguing to me was you had this, at the time, 150-year-old brand, which was a brand new company. And so a lot of opportunity to build the team, build processes, technology systems, that sort of thing. Early 2020, February of 2020, I became the Chief People Officer with Valvoline. So that has continued kind of the nonstop action. Obviously, like many of us navigated the pandemic. And then as we emerged from that, we announced intent to separate the business, which resulted in the sale of our global products business to Aramco in 23. And then, the last few years, we've really have settled in. Now we are this pure play retail organization. We've got a new executive team since that global products transaction that we've really reestablished ourselves as a high growth, pure play retail organization. So we operate in the US and Canada now, Valvoline Inc. We have around 2,300 stores. And our growth plans have us at 3,500 stores. And so you asked, focus of our team is really, we are really proud of the culture that we have. We use the term Vamily around here. So family with a V to describe our culture. It's something that's been built through the years, long before I joined Valvoline. You had great leaders in here who were really shepherding that culture. And so our focus is, we believe it's a competitive advantage for us and helps enable our growth. So how do we maintain that competitive advantage as we, increase our system-wide store count by 50% over the next 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share a little bit more about what you do as an organization to maintain that family culture while you are really scaling and growing fast?
Absolutely. A few things come to mind. So our people leaders are critical. And at Valvoline, we're proud that over 95% of our managers started in hourly roles here at Valvoline. And so one, your culture, we have this organizational culture, but then We have those 2,300 stores I mentioned. About 1,200 are company owned and operated, 1,100 are franchise. Each store has its own unique culture or spin on the Vamily culture. And it's only as good as the people leader that really shepherds and supports that culture. So I think because we have this grow from within mentality, it's allowed us to maintain and sustain our culture through over the last decade or so, because we've had significant growth. We've doubled in size in the last decade. So I think that's one critical component of it, is just finding great leaders who have this pay it forward mentality. They were once in, the technician's shoes, so they understand, their challenges, the opportunities ahead. So really perpetuates kind of consistency in culture throughout generations of managers, if you will. The second thing, we really try to ensure that we've got consistent talent processes across all of our stores. So from a talent acquisition, onboarding, development planning, training, if we can ensure that across our system that we're consistent in that employee experience, then we're going to be consistent in the customer experience that we provide to our guests as well. And then finally, I've found that there are a handful of important traditions that we have had in place now for many, many years. And much like, there are family traditions, whether they're, tied to the holidays or, summer vacations, different things like that. For us, those things matter and help maintain culture. So we have we have an annual meeting of all of our store managers that's incredibly high energy. It recognizes the success that the team has had the past year and really sets the stage for what we're focusing on in the new year. We call that our Vamily reunion every year. And so that's an opportunity to kind of renew and reset and refresh everyone and kind of drive home our values and the focus on our people. We also have this thing called the Oil Olympics, which is an annual process that allows us, really, it's a competition, a friendly internal competition. Each store can field their own team. And the competition is who can execute on our Super Pro process to change oil and service the vehicles, who can do that perfectly, follow every step. And then the tiebreaker is who can then do it the fastest if you have multiple teams that do it perfectly. And so it's a cascading sort of competition where, you have a competition at the store level, area, market, and then national level. And we do that right before the busiest time of our year, which is summer drive season. So it's a huge recognition opportunity. Our teams love the competition, but it also allows us to retrain our teams each and every year. I think those traditions matter.
Brilliant. I have a question, a follow-up question. So you're talking about a big growth challenge in front of you, and one that you've been through. There is a lot of talking in the industry around succession, basically, and specifically critical roles, right? Like every organization has what it called critical roles. Usually it's like 10 to 15% of the roles in the organization. And according to the literature, 50% of those critical roles do not have already in our successor. And 30%, according to McKinsey, are not ready now for their like actual role, right? Out of the critical roles. So this happens when you're not in hyper growth mode. So probably when you're growing, you need to fill more roles, you need to fill more succession, especially if you're very proud of having like the hourly workers eventually becoming your future leaders.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that, about, if you'd like to share your own stats around like ready now, what you're doing about it, how do you basically make a lot of people ready to future leadership when you're looking at this very
Yeah.
fast growth?
In our environment, let me talk about that in two different ways. So within our store operations, which again is so critical to have the right management pipeline in place, we have had great success, as I mentioned, in promoting from within. Almost all of our managers are started in hourly technician roles here. Um, as I look out in the next 5 years, because those roles are critical, and like most retail organizations, we have VP, director, market manager, area manager, and then store manager. So there's the typical kind of reverse funnel of talent and ladder. Um, I feel really good about the successors that we have in place for those those top line leaders, VP, director, market manager, even area manager. And to some degree, it's a numbers game, right? What attracts people to our organization a lot of times and keeps them here are those career opportunities. And so when you're going from, for us, we have about, 1,200 store managers today that are, we can prepare for those 140 or so area managers. The numbers work out pretty well. We have good success filling those. Where we are starting to be challenged a little bit with growth, plus there's turnover in retail, is at that store manager level. Because we've accelerated this growth now for a few years and have been growing faster than we were even, in previous years. We are starting to figure out how do we, when we hire in at an assistant manager level, how do we accelerate their development? So if generally they would be ready in 18 to 24 months, how do we improve that and get them ready in 9 to 12 months? And so it's us taking a step back, thinking about the experience, what skills, what experiences are critical, what exposure do they need, and then making sure that we build that into the process. On the corporate side, the thing that I'm finding that to become more and more critical, a company our size, so we're about $2 billion in annual revenue. If you count our franchisees, we're maybe $4 billion in system-wide sales. So it's all relative, right? We're a big company, but we're not a massive company by any stretch. And so there are times when I think about critical roles at the director and up level in the corporate team that we may not be able to afford having the right person kind of waiting in the wings to backfill a vice president or a senior director. And so what we have talked a lot about as an executive team over the last couple of years, and it feeds into our talent review process, is the importance of versatility. So who are those, there's an old book around the corporate athlete, who are those individuals that their value is not just in being a specialist. Like a lot of times in roles like legal or tech, you're going to have specialists and their career growth is within that vertical. But when you get into other areas of the business, how do you move someone from finance into operations, into central ops to marketing, that sort of thing? And so it's really, I think what we're finding is just this value in versatility of talent, people that, have the right, balance of leadership skills, they're effective communicators, they can manage a project and, from kind of white sheet of paper to completion and execution. They're analytical, and even especially now tech savvy. Those things I think are becoming incredibly critical, and can really help, skyrocket someone's career.
Yeah. I think it's especially interesting is if you think about 62%, I believe, of people don't have college degrees. So the fact that a lot of your hourly technicians are moving through this leadership pipeline, but it's really about fostering those skills that matter in critical roles to be able to grow, develop them into the leaders that they have the potential to reach. So very interesting.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
great point. And we think about that a lot, and there's a lot in the media today around, maybe more non-traditional careers, or blue collar careers, and to your point, Madeline, like 62% of adults in the US don't have a college degree. And we're incredibly proud that, individuals can come here. It never hurts, right? A college degree certainly helps, in our store operations team. But you don't have to have that to come here and really build a fantastic career.
One thing that we haven't fully talked about, I know you touched about it when we talked about culture, but you are also rolling out a new employer brand that is centered around all roads lead to Valvoline. And it's this employee value proposition that really messages to every single employee in your organization, regardless of role or function, that you bring what drives you. Can you talk a little bit about what drove this rebrand and what that means in practice and how you see that come to life in your employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, we were thinking to ourselves, we have this amazing story. We have this great culture. We can showcase a lot, right? We've got, as I've mentioned, it's a great place to come and build a career, but we're not telling that story effectively or consistently in the market, especially when you consider our franchise partners, which is again makes up about half of our store count and overall employee population. So we partnered with Shaker Consulting, they do a lot of recruitment marketing, branding work. and worked with them. And we wanted something that was um, kind of defined who we were when we're at our best. And we also wanted something that took a concept, and sometimes advertising can be impersonal, and how do you make it personal and make it real and authentic? And so where we landed was, as you mentioned, our tagline is "All roads lead to Valvoline," which is intentional in that it has a very inclusive message. Contrary to what some may think, one, you don't need any prior automotive experience. You didn't need to grow up in your grandfather's garage to work at Valvoline. We'll teach you. It's preventative maintenance. It's process driven. We can teach all of that. And two, yes, the large majority of individuals in our stores are male, but we've got so many great success stories whose demographics don't necessarily meet stereotypically who you would think you would find in one of our stores. Female being front and center there. And so, message of inclusivity is kind of the umbrella. All roads lead to Valvoline, and then the theme line is bring what drives you. And that was critical because, as through the years, as I've thought about employer brand, you realize that, especially in retail, you want to cast a wide net. And what attracts people to their employer, why people stay at their employer, are for many different reasons. So we say, bring what drives you, because regardless of what you're motivated by, you can find it here at Valvoline. And that being, it could be that career growth that we've talked about. It could be, I think we have the ultimate team environment. Our teams, frankly, operate as a bit of a pit crew, like a NASCAR pit crew, in that they're entirely dependent upon one another to service each guest that comes into our stores one at a time. It could be the impact that we have on if once you get into management roles, developing and promoting the next generation of talent. We're big in supporting our community. We use the term happy to help, both with our guests and in our community efforts. And so if you want to have that sort of impact, you could come to Valvoline and find that. So regardless of what you're looking for and how that may evolve, through your career. You may come and you just need, hey, I'm just looking for a good solid pay and benefits. But then when you get here, you stick around because of the career growth, or you fall in love with the culture and the social aspect. So regardless of what drives you, we think we can satisfy those needs here at Valvoline. And regardless of who you are, where you come from, your story, your motivators, your background, you can be successful here.
Yeah, I think it also for me goes back to the skills piece too, because I heard you mention we can teach that, we can grow people. It's a matter of having the right, almost soft skills, growth mindset to foster that type of learning environment. So that's really interesting too, to cast that wider net, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it is a good balance. It's exactly right. All of our new technicians get 150 hours of training on the process, early on. So we'll teach them the technical aspects. And then we also hire and promote. We look at the ideal team player attributes. So there's a Patrick Lencioni book that he wrote called The Ideal Team Player. And those three attributes of the ideal team player are, being hungry, humble, and smart. And the smart is really people smart. So EQ over IQ. And so that permeated our culture. We introduced that to our organization about 5 years ago. And it has really stuck, I think, because it's simple, at least simple to understand, and it's repeatable and sustainable. But it is that balance, to your point, between there's a technical aspect of what we do and a very hands-on, you want someone that is mechanically inclined and is going to pay attention to quality in servicing each and every vehicle. But then there's the human element, and there's the customer experience and developing talent. And that's where those attributes of the ideal team player are really critical.
I have a question about that. How do you see your values and your culture reflecting in the customer experience?
First of all, I think those ideal team player attributes, they're not only, make you an effective employee, but in servicing the guests that come into our base. So, that humility, that authenticity, it's critical. The people smart side of it, being able to connect and understand, we realize that guests that pull into our stores, we're human beings. We're all very different. Some are, I think about, I've got three children that are all kind of in the college age, young adult age. And they were all scared to death the first time that I made them go and get their oil changed at one of our stores. And it's from, what if I drive into the pit to, what if they ask me a question about an additional service and how do I respond? And so those same ideal team player attributes that make people want to work with you will make customers and guests that come into our stores want to do business with you as well. So I think there's a huge correlation. We're not only a retail organization, but we're service driven. We're a retail service provider. So we are so reliant upon the talent that we have in our stores to be successful.
That's amazing. And I would like to come back for a second to the succession question I asked
Yeah.
you slightly earlier. So you talked about two things. So you said, okay, I have basically this ladder, right, of basically 1,200 store managers, 140 area managers. And so there is basically a pyramid. And your challenge in cutting more or less in half the assistant manager time to becoming a store manager, right?
Yeah.
So one question is, how do you go about it? Like, how do you accelerate a natural process that happens? And the second question is, even though you have enough store managers to be area manager candidate, you basically need around 10%, 12%. When they're being promoted, probably there are still skill gaps, right? Because they know how to be a store manager, not an area manager. So how do you rapidly prepare them for their current area manager role? And same for like director, VP. But I think those two questions are questions that a lot of organizations are struggling with. Like,
Yeah.
how do I shorten succession? And once the succession has been filled, how do I make sure that they're performing great, not only as a store manager, but as an area manager?
Two things come to mind. So one is we do have, I would say we have really good training programs for the assistant center manager to become a service center manager. They're not quite as strong as they need to be, and we're working on that to get to the area manager role. But one, I would say it is that formal education. What are the things that are different about, when you take that step, when you make that turn to become a service center manager and then an area manager, what's new and unique that you need to learn? I think the biggest thing though is the intentionality and around the time that and the mentorship that they get from others at that level or their current manager is critical. We subscribe to the 70-20-10 model for development, which is, 70% is experiential learning, 20% is exposure, and 10% is the formal learning. I think the formal learning piece is critical because it builds consistency, especially, across our population and all the markets that we're in. And I think what we're trying to get better at and are getting better at, but we still have opportunity, is providing more intentionality in that exposure and experience and what that looks like. We realize that sort of hip to hip mentorship and that you get from your manager, or when you become a new area manager, we have this great built-in community of people who are truly happy to help and support one another, because again, they walked in your shoes a couple of years ago. But how do we become more prescriptive in what that looks like? And because I will say, the opportunity or the potential pitfall you have is that it's only, you do it really well in one market and not so well in another market. And or even if you do it well in both markets, but they're doing it differently. So how do we become more prescriptive in, hey, as we've identified someone who we think can be an area manager in the next 6 months, what does that experience start to look like for them? What does the mentorship, the coaching they get? When their area manager comes into their store, what do those visits look like? What do those conversations look like? So our focus right now is how do we put more consistency in that so that it's not left to you're as good as the manager that you have and how well they do it and maybe what they saw or how they were developed, right? So I think it is as much as I talk about consistency and scalability in our talent processes, I think it's consistency in those things that historically we've not viewed as a process, because it's a set of conversations, or it's the store visits that are done. It's things like that. How do we How do we, that 70% learning that's inexperienced, that's experientially based, how do we drive more consistency in that?
Well, I think that's a good segue because speaking of change in management and creating that consistency, you've also talked quite a bit about Valvoline's divestiture and the change and transformation that your organization went through back in 2023. So I would love to give some space for that because I think that is a massive amount of change to navigate as an HR leader. How did you go about that level of change, and what were some of the processes? Your direct report became the chief people officer of the products org. So navigating that level of restructuring, making sure the right people were in the right roles. What did that look like for you in that process?
So it was a long process. It was, I think, September of 21 when we announced intent to separate the business. And the driving force behind that was, as a public company, we really wanted a clear story for our investors, and for analysts. We felt like, we had really strong performance, specifically on the retail side, and a great growth story, but we didn't have any good, um, the investors didn't really know who to compare us to, because we weren't a pure retailer. We also had this products business, that has a CPG marketing angle to it, and a B2B side, and a global dimension. So that was really the platform for why we were making the change. And it was, 18 months later when ultimately the deal closed to sell products to Aramco. So during that 18 months, I think the first thing is that I learned, and I think we did a pretty good job, but I would tell you, if I had it to do over again, I would do even more of this, is just communicate. And right when you think you're communicating and providing as much clarity as you can in this period of significant uncertainty, you probably need to do even more. Opening up transparency around where we are, the process. Um, Early on, we did a couple of things from a retention perspective. So, there were a couple of things that we did with respect to, the individuals who had equity, where we guaranteed that if they had a position lost during this process, that their equity would vest, or here would be the severance package they would get if something happened and their role was eliminated through the process. And at least giving some of those assurances, people are then like, okay, you know, one of two things is going to happen here. I'm going to end up with a role that is equal or better than the one I'm in today, or I'm going to be taken care of and allowed to kind of bridge the gap to the next role here. As things started to become more clear that the deal was going to be the sale of the global products business, we started to then look at, both organizations. And you're really looking at the corporate functions, HR, finance, tech, legal, et cetera. And we did want to set up both companies for success. And so we started a process that I think went as smoothly as it could have, to really determine who moves with global products and who stays with Valvoline Retail. What helped is, Aramco. It was a great deal for both businesses, frankly. Aramco, has allowed Valvoline Global to continue to operate as its own affiliate company. They have invested in that business more than we could. They have the wherewithal to do so. So that company is growing, Valvoline Global, and it created more opportunity. There were only, a couple of individuals, or positions that were eliminated, and there were many more that were created because of the sale and to where they landed. And even for individuals who were currently with the organization, as you mentioned, you had people who maybe were at a director level that moved to a VP level, or someone who was leading a function, a business unit, and now they were the top line leader for the function that they led. Their CEO, Jamal Masher, was, president of that business for the combined Valvoline company, and he stepped into the CEO role. So a lot of great success stories that I was really happy about, because even the team that I was leading, our HR team, I worked with and hired many of the individuals in the first, 6-7 years that I was here. And so it was a lot. It was easier for me to wish them well in their new organizations because I knew they would be well taken care of. And I think we did have some success. You always learn lessons and would do things differently, and in hindsight. But I think we did a fairly good job of being open, honest, transparent, and really leading with a people first mentality that frankly matches our culture to begin with. And now you've got, like I said, Valvoline Global is set up for success. We have a really clear story for our investors, and are really well positioned as this pure play high growth retail organization.
To sort of piggyback off of that, I think, what we're seeing in the macroeconomic environment now, companies are going through change faster and faster. What advice do you have for HR leaders that are navigating that? Or what are some of the maybe lessons learned that you could give to any organization going through that level of change?
Yeah, yeah. You know, I, I've learned through the years, and this has probably been in the last decade of not being too internally focused. So keeping up with trends, best practices, what's going on outside of your organization, your industry, I think is critical. One, it gives you a longer term view at the world. So you can anticipate challenges that maybe aren't hitting your organization today, but you see them coming, or you can take advantage of opportunities, that exists that maybe you wouldn't if you were very insulated in your thinking. So I think that's one thing that can help prepare you for change and help you get ahead of the change curve. Then I think once you're in it, being authentic and consistent in your leadership is critical. So, the spotlight is on you even more when you go through periods of change. I think about like, helping the organization navigate COVID, communicating about the sale of global products and the separation of our two business segments. Those are moments where people are paying more attention to what you're saying. They're probably actually reading the emails that come from you. That's a little tongue in cheek, but so it's critical to be, don't change who you are, your tone, your style. You need to be transparent with the message, but being authentic, and then just consistency. I think that's one thing that I've prided myself in is, you try to remain pretty cool under pressure, and then just be consistent in how you communicate, what you communicate, how you make decisions, what drives those decisions. Because the more you can be consistent, the more it empowers the next level of leadership to then make decisions confidently, because they know, okay, well, this is what John, or this is what my leader's thinking, because they always are thinking this way, and this is how they would discern this. So, I kind of understand that direction, and I feel more confident in making a call in a fast moving, time of change.
You've talked a lot about your shift as an HR leader from being more relational to analytical. How did that come to play in some of your decision making as a leader? And what yeah, what are you taking with you in 2026? Like, what are some of those key skills that you as an HR leader are honing in on to really drive your organization to success?
Yeah. I think what I've learned in this role, and even, I spent a lot of my career in an HR business partner type role, and there is a bit of a jack of all trades element to it. And so I think, and I define that sometimes in that spectrum between, there's heavy relational things that you do and analytical things. And so think about even in a chief people officer type role, you've got, of course, the talent acquisition, learning, HR business partner, employee relations types of aspects to it. Then you're also, looking into, executive compensation, benefits, diving into data to understand, what keeps people here, how do we improve our processes around talent acquisition, onboarding, things like that. And so, I think, it's someone who's growing, in their HR career, and has aspirations to lead at a higher level and be in a chief people officer type role. I think that sort of versatility and understanding all aspects is critical. I've heard through the years, it's been a while, but earlier, maybe in my career, I heard it more when you're interviewing someone for an HR job, or someone who's, you're having coffee with because they may want to explore an HR career. And it's like, I'm really a people person. And that's why I want to move into HR. And I do think there's an element of that to it. But I think that the analytical side, um, you know, especially in organizations like ours, that we're sitting on just such great data that can give you amazing insights around how to improve your hiring practice and engage your talent in a better way, et cetera. So I think really sharpening skills around the analytical piece. I think from there, it's similar to that 70-20-10 model. How do you get better at that? Some of it, I think, comes with experience and exposure, and just the kind of learning from what you've seen. You're able to better connect the dots, and look at the big picture and understand the story that's coming together based on the data and the results that you're seeing. And there's also a formal learning element to it. So I think that would be my advice, to someone is really just, continue to look forward. And a lot of times as HR professionals, we are focused on the organization and developing the organization and other leaders in the organization. And it is important to pause and take time for you as well, and make sure you're continuing to sharpen your skills.
I like a lot of elements here, but I think it all comes down everything to what you said in the beginning, kind of like just understanding very sharply what you're trying to do, what's the story, what are the core values, and then just implementing it. And then, changes come, like you're growing, there is the AI, there is the Aramco, like a lot of things happen.
Yeah.
But when you stick to your core values and just have a very clear path around it, like that's kind of like what everything comes down to. So thank you. It was inspiring.
Yeah. Thank you. No, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to connect with you all today.